Imagine this. You're watching someone's life unfold. Someone ordinary. Someone who could be you, your friend, your sister, maybe even a version of yourself that once believed love was simple. But here's the twist. You are about to witness how one woman's heartbreak turned into the biggest, strangest, most unexpected story of her life. I know you clicked on this video for a reason. The title itself, The Rich Man Who Ignored Her Is Now Her Husband by Mistake, pulled you in because somewhere deep down you are curious about how fate plays its game. How a moment of rejection can flip into a shocking marriage, and how people who once stood on opposite sides of pride, wealth, and ego suddenly end up under the same roof, sharing the same last name. Don't worry, you are in the right place. Because in the next few minutes, you're not just going to hear another random story, you are going to live inside it. I want you to lean in, to feel this, because the answer you came here for, the burning question in your head, how on earth did he ignore her, and yet marry her by mistake, is something I promise will be answered. But you need to stay until the end, because that is where the real truth is revealed, and I guarantee you, it's nothing like what you are imagining right now. Let's start with her. Her name is Emily Carter. She wasn't born rich, she wasn't raised in luxury, and she never had the golden spoon in her mouth. She was like so many of us, working long shifts, paying rent on time, chasing dreams that always seemed just one step out of reach. Emily believed in hard work, in patience, in the kind of love that movies talk about but life rarely delivers. And then came him Daniel Hayes. The name itself carried weight. The kind of name whispered at social gatherings, printed in magazines, and attached to a fortune built on real estate empires, private jets, and glittering penthouses that touched the sky. Daniel was the man every woman thought she wanted. Tall, handsome, powerful, untouchable. But here's the thing, you're about to discover that what glitters isn't always gold. And sometimes the people we admire the most are the ones who wound us the deepest. Emily met Daniel not in a fairy tale moment, but in one of those everyday encounters where fate pretends to be casual but is secretly laying the foundation for a storm. She wasn't dressed like the glamorous women who usually circled around him. She was just herself, in jeans, her hair tied back, carrying a stack of resumes she had been dropping off in hopes of getting a better job. And Daniel barely looked at her. He didn't see her as a person, not then. To him she was just another face in the crowd, another woman daring to stand in front of him, another request he didn't have time for. He ignored her, and I don't mean the kind of polite brush-off you give when you're too busy. No, Daniel dismissed her existence like she was invisible. That moment burned into Emily's memory, not because she wanted him to notice her, but because it reminded her how cruel the world could be when you were standing alone without wealth, status, or power to back you up. And now you're wondering, right? If he ignored her so coldly, how on earth did he end up becoming her husband? That's the mystery. That's the knot that fate tied so tightly, the knot we're about to untangle together. And let me tell you, it's not about a fairy tale wedding or a charming proposal. No, what happened was messy, accidental, shocking, and it turned Emily's entire world upside down. If you've ever believed that life is unfair, or that people like Emily never get a chance against people like Daniel, you're going to want to watch closely, because this story will challenge that belief. It's not just a love story, it's a story about pride, mistakes, second chances, and the strange way destiny has of humiliating the powerful while lifting up the humble. Now, let's pause for a second. I want you, the person watching this, to really connect with Emily. Think about a time in your own life when you felt ignored, unseen, undervalued. Remember that sting, that frustration that no matter how much you tried, someone with more money, more status, more arrogance, made you feel like you were nothing. That's exactly what Emily carried in her heart. And that memory would come back to her, stronger than ever, when she woke up one morning and realized she was legally bound to the very man who once dismissed her without a second thought. Yes, you heard that right, bound as in married. And you want to know the craziest part? Neither of them saw it coming, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, because to understand how this accidental marriage even happened, you need to see the world these two lived in. Daniel, the billionaire, lived in skyscrapers of glass and steel, where the air smelled of expensive cologne and champagne, where deals were signed over cigars, and where women sparkled like diamonds on his arm but never touched his heart. He was a man used to winning, used to getting what he wanted, and when he didn't want something or someone, he made sure they knew it. Emily, on the other hand, lived in a tiny apartment where the walls were thin and the rent was high, where dinner was often leftovers, and where dreams were carried on sheer determination instead of credit cards. Two different worlds, to different people, colliding in a way that neither money nor planning could control. And here's where I want you to stay sharp, because this is where the seeds of mystery start to grow. A mistake, a signature, a twist in paperwork that should have been ordinary but wasn't. And before Emily or Daniel even realized what had happened, their names were tied together on a marriage certificate that couldn't be undone without consequences neither of them were ready for. How does something like that happen? That's the question I know is bouncing inside your head right now. That's why you clicked. And I promise you, if you stick with me till the end, you'll see every detail, every shocking turn, and every emotional beat that led to this unbelievable marriage. But let me also prepare you, this story isn't just about a marriage on paper. It's about what comes after. The clash of two egos, one hardened by arrogance and one strengthened by survival. The spark of attraction that neither of them wanted to admit. The secrets that Daniel carried, secrets he thought were hidden beneath his billions, and the strength Emily didn't even know she had, the kind that only shows up when life throws you into the fire. I want you to feel this story, not just hear it. I want you to see yourself in Emily. To understand that sometimes being ignored is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of something much bigger. So as you sit there watching, keep asking yourself, if you were Emily, what would you do? Would you walk away from the man who humiliated you, or would you stand and fight because fate itself decided you were tied to him? That's the tension, that's the drama, and that's why you can't click away now. Because we are only scratching the surface, and the storm that is about to hit their lives will leave you shocked, maybe even breathless. You came here for answers, and I promised, the deeper we go, the closer we'll get. But let me leave you with this cliffhanger before we dive into the next part. On the night Emily discovered her accidental marriage to Daniel Hayes, she received a phone call that would change everything again. A voice on the other end whispered a truth so dangerous, so unbelievable, that her marriage was no longer just a mistake, it was a trap. Emily's fingers trembled as she held the phone to her ear. The voice on the other end echoing like a shadow through her tiny apartment. It wasn't just what the caller said, it was how they said it, the tone dripping with a warning that cut through her like ice. She didn't know who the caller was or why they knew about her accidental marriage, but the words replayed in her mind long after the line went dead. Be careful, Emily. He didn't marry you by mistake. Nothing Daniel Hayes does is ever a mistake. That sentence hit her harder than any insult, harder than the memory of being ignored, because in that moment, Emily realized something she wasn't prepared for. What if the billionaire who had brushed her aside wasn't as careless as he seemed? What if she had walked straight into a trap carefully designed to pull her into his world? Her world, up until then, had been built on fragile consistency. Early mornings, low pay, endless hustle just to keep her head above water. She had no time for glamour, no taste for champagne, no reason to believe she would ever cross paths with someone like Daniel Hayes again. And yet here she was, staring at legal documents, staring at the fine print that bound her name to his, and now hearing a warning that refused to leave her mind. Emily didn't know whether to feel terrified or furious. On one hand, she wanted to scream at fate for pulling her into a billionaire marriage she never asked for. On the other, there was a spark inside her that whispered maybe, just maybe, she was standing at the beginning of a story far bigger than herself. She just didn't know yet whether it was a love story, a power play, or a dangerous game she was destined to lose. Daniel, meanwhile, lived like nothing had changed. To him, marriage was a word that could be dissolved with lawyers, a piece of paper that meant little when measured against his empire. But what unsettled him, though he would never admit it out loud, was how Emily lingered in his mind. He had ignored her once without guilt, brushing her off like she was invisible, and now the universe had dragged her back, not as a stranger but as his wife. The irony gnawed at him. Billionaire love stories were meant to start with choice, with desire, not with accidents or mistakes. Yet there she was, standing in his penthouse one night, her presence so painfully real it disrupted the cold perfection of his world. And what Daniel hated most was that she didn't look impressed. She didn't swoon over the floor-to-ceiling windows or the skyline glittering like diamonds. She wasn't like the others who entered his life chasing money, power, or fame. Emily looked at him like a man she had already seen at his worst, a man who once ignored her without a second thought, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Behind the glitter and wealth, however, there were whispers Daniel kept locked away. Whispers about a business deal that had gone wrong. Whispers about rivals who wanted to see him fall. Whispers about a decision that could make or break his empire. Emily didn't know it yet, but she had stepped into a battlefield disguised as a marriage, and whether she liked it or not, her name on that paper made her part of it. Every time she walked through his offices or appeared by his side in public, cameras flashed, articles popped up, hashtags spread across trending search bars. Billionaire marries mystery woman, accidental marriage or hidden love story. The internet buzzed with curiosity. But behind closed doors, Emily felt the weight of eyes watching her, some with fascination, others with envy, and a few with something darker, something dangerous. Emily tried to understand how this had all spiraled. She replayed the day she went to submit a job application at a company Daniel's empire owned, how a clerical mix-up had put her name on documents she never should have signed, and how that paperwork tied with a corporate merger ended up doubling as a legal marriage registration. At first she thought it was a bureaucratic nightmare, something that would get fixed with a few signatures and a meeting at the courthouse. But the deeper she looked, the more strange it became. Some signatures didn't look right. Some documents had dates that didn't match. And the one thing that chilled her was that Daniel didn't. He looked surprised when it was all revealed. He looked calm, almost like he had expected it. That calmness echoed in her mind like the caller's warning. What if none of this was an accident at all? And while Emily battled confusion, there were others watching from the sidelines. Daniel's ex, a woman named Vanessa, had once imagined herself as the only rightful partner of a man like him. She had the beauty, the connections, the lifestyle, but she lacked one thing Daniel secretly admired: authenticity. Vanessa saw Emily as an intruder, someone beneath her, someone who needed to be erased before she could ever belong in Daniel's world. And she wasn't the only one. Investors, family rivals, and people Daniel had crossed in the business world all saw Emily as leverage, a weakness, a pawn they could use against a billionaire who had spent years making himself untouchable. Emily's accidental marriage had put her on a chessboard where every move was dangerous, and she didn't even know what game was being played yet. But Emily wasn't weak, not truly. What Daniel and the world didn't see was the quiet resilience she had built from years of survival, growing up with little working jobs that drained her spirit, fighting through days where giving up seemed easier. Those experiences had made her strong in ways money couldn't buy. So while she stood in Daniel's lavish home feeling out of place, she also knew she wasn't going to let herself be swallowed by his world. She wasn't going to let the cameras, the rumors, or even Daniel himself dictate who she was. And maybe that was what began to catch his attention. Not her beauty, not her status, but the stubborn refusal to bend even when she stood in front of a man who could buy and sell everything she owned in a single day. Still, the danger lingered. That phone call replayed in her mind every night. The caller had said it with certainty: nothing Daniel does is ever a mistake. So if this marriage wasn't a mistake, then what was it? A strategy. A way to protect himself from something bigger, or something more personal, something tied to emotions he never showed in public. Emily didn't know, but what she did know was that the moment she started digging for answers, things around her began to change. Shadows followed her on the street. Strangers lingered too long when she passed. Emails popped into her inbox that she hadn't signed up for. Someone was keeping tabs on her, and it wasn't just the media. And so the question hanging in the air grew heavier with each passing day. Had Emily accidentally stumbled into a love story, or had she walked straight into the heart of a dangerous secret where love, power, and betrayal twisted together? Daniel's silence gave nothing away, his eyes revealing less than his actions, and Emily found herself torn between wanting to trust him and wanting to run as far as she could. The tension between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. And yet the mystery of their accidental marriage loomed larger than either of them could escape. And just when Emily thought she had reached her limit of confusion, another letter arrived, slipped under her door, unsigned, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. The message was short, chilling, and impossible to ignore. Your marriage isn't just his mistake, it's your test. Pass it, or you lose everything. Emily stared at the letter as though the ink itself might burn her hands. The message was clear, haunting, and dangerous, and for the first time since her accidental marriage to Daniel Hayes, she realized she might not be the only one caught in this strange trap. Someone out there knew too much. Someone who wasn't just warning her but testing her. And that idea rattled her to her core. She had walked into a billionaire romance story that was already trending across the internet as a juicy scandal. But behind the glossy headlines and social media buzz, something darker was moving in silence. The world believed this was just another accidental marriage story that would fizzle out with divorce lawyers and media statements. But Emily was beginning to understand it was never just about her and Daniel. It was about power, secrets, and something she didn't yet have the courage to name. Daniel, on the other hand, noticed the change in her eyes. She wasn't the same woman who had once stood before him humiliated and ignored. Emily now carried herself with a mix of fear and defiance, as though she was bracing for a fight no one else could see. And while he still projected the image of the confident billionaire who always had the upper hand, deep down he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. For years, Daniel had been the one making moves, playing strategies, and controlling every narrative. But Emily's presence had stirred a vulnerability he didn't want to admit existed. He told himself it was annoyance, irritation at being tied to a woman who didn't belong in his world, but the truth was more unsettling. She was forcing him to see himself differently, and that truth terrified him more than any business rival ever could. Vanessa, watching from the sidelines, saw opportunity. The media frenzy over Daniel's so-called mysterious wife gave her fuel to stoke. She began leaking carefully crafted stories to online tabloids, painting Emily as a manipulator who had orchestrated the accidental marriage as a way to trap a billionaire. Hashtags started trending, hashtag gold digger wife, hashtag billionaire mistake, hashtag billionaire mistake, hashtag marriage scandal. These narratives gained traction quickly, spreading across YouTube shorts, TikTok edits, and gossip blogs. For every kind comment Emily received, there were 10 more accusing her of playing a game. Emily didn't ask for this spotlight, yet here she was, torn apart by strangers on the internet who knew nothing about her truth. But beneath the noise of public opinion, there was something Vanessa didn't expect: Daniel's silence. He didn't publicly defend Emily, but he also didn't distance himself. That silence left everyone guessing, and in the guessing, Vanessa sensed danger. Because Daniel's silence often meant he was planning something bigger than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Emily began piecing together the odd details surrounding her marriage. She visited the courthouse in secret, requesting copies of documents she wasn't supposed to see. To her shock, she found that her signature appeared on more than just one form. It was on contracts tied to Daniel's businesses, legal filings that gave her power she didn't even know she held. The discovery left her shaken. Why would Daniel let this happen? Why hadn't he erased her involvement immediately, as a man of his wealth and influence easily could, unless, of course, he needed her there? The idea that her presence wasn't accidental but intentional sent a chill through her, and the words from the mysterious caller echoed once again. Nothing he does is ever a mistake. The unexpected twist came one late evening when Daniel finally confronted her in his penthouse. His tone was calm, almost too calm, but his words cut through her. He admitted that her signature had protected one of his companies from a hostile takeover. That, in a way, her accidental involvement had saved billions. Emily was stunned. Was she nothing more than a shield in his empire? But before she could process the betrayal, Daniel revealed something even more shocking. He wasn't the one who arranged the mix-up. Someone else had orchestrated it, and he didn't know who. For once, the untouchable billionaire confessed ignorance, and that truth shifted the entire balance between them. If Daniel wasn't behind it, then who was powerful enough to manipulate paperwork, trap Emily into a marriage, and still leave Daniel unsettled? At that moment, Emily realized the stakes were far higher than she imagined. This wasn't just a billionaire romance gone wrong or an accidental marriage scandal the internet loved to gossip about. She had been pulled into a larger web, one involving enemies Daniel hadn't named, rivals who played in shadows, and threats that didn't care about love stories or happy endings. Every step she took beside him was being watched, not just by paparazzi but by unseen players waiting for her to make the wrong move. The danger wasn't just emotional anymore, it was real, and it was closing in. The tension between Emily and Daniel deepened, a mix of distrust, reluctant reliance, and a chemistry neither could fully deny. He was still the man who once ignored her, still the billionaire who had the power to crush her with a word, but he was also the man who now stood beside her in silence, admitting weakness, showing cracks in his armor. And Emily, despite her anger, couldn't ignore the flicker of humanity in his confession. It terrified her because it meant that even as she tried to protect herself, her heart was beginning to betray her. Just as the atmosphere between them grew unbearably tense, another blow arrived. A video leaked online, grainy, shadowy, but damning. It showed Emily meeting with an unknown man in a cafe, the footage edited to make it look like she was conspiring against Daniel. The clip spread like wildfire, and the hashtags turned uglier. #billionaire braid, #wife secret plot, #marriage lie. Emily knew the video was fake, but the damage was done. Suddenly, she wasn't just the accidental wife, she was painted as the enemy within his walls. And as Daniel stood silently watching the news report replay the video, Emily saw in his eyes the question he was too afraid to ask. Was she truly innocent, or had he married his greatest betrayer by mistake? And in that silence, Emily realized the nightmare had only just begun, because the real enemy wasn't Daniel, and it wasn't Vanessa. It was someone in the shadows, someone who knew exactly how to twist every truth into a lie, someone who wanted her out of the way. And she had no idea how far they were willing to go. The leaked video changed everything. Overnight, Emily became the villain of her own story, dragged across social media headlines as the wife who betrayed the billionaire, her face plastered on gossip channels and trending hashtags that painted her as manipulative and untrustworthy. It was as if the entire internet had turned into a courtroom, with millions of strangers acting as judge and jury, convinced she had schemed her way into Daniel's life only to stab him in the back. She tried to protest, to show Daniel that the video was doctored, but doubt had already wormed its way into his mind. For the first time since their marriage, Emily felt a distance between them that terrified her, because even though she had entered this union by accident, she no longer wanted to lose him. Daniel was torn, and for a man who built his empire on clarity and decisive action, hesitation was the one thing he despised. His instincts told him Emily wasn't capable of betrayal, that the woman who looked him in the eyes with such raw honesty couldn't be the same woman in that video. But the businessman in him, the man raised to trust no one and expect the worst, kept whispering that everyone had a price, and maybe Emily's had already been paid. What unsettled him most wasn't the video itself, but the precision with which it was released. Whoever orchestrated this wanted not just to ruin Emily, but to shatter Daniel's trust, to destabilize him from the inside. And that made Emily not a liability, but a target, and Daniel was starting to see that the real enemy was closer than either of them imagined. The turning point came when Emily decided to confront the situation head-on. She tracked down the cafe from the video, demanding to see security footage from the date in question. At first, the cafe owner resisted, nervous about crossing powerful people, but Emily's determination wore him down. What she discovered shocked her. The original footage showed her sitting alone, drinking coffee quietly, never meeting anyone at all. The mysterious man she had been shown with had been edited in later, expertly inserted to frame her. Armed with the proof, Emily rushed back to Daniel, her heart pounding not just with fear but with hope that this would finally clear her name. But when she arrived at his office, she found something she didn't expect. Vanessa standing confidently at his side, her hand resting casually on a stack of files as if she belonged there. The moment was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Vanessa smiled, too sweetly, and Emily realized the truth in an instant. Vanessa wasn't just bitter over losing Daniel, she was the one behind the scheme all along. The fake stories, the leaked video, the edited footage. All of it had been her calculated attempt to destroy Emily and reclaim what she believed was hers. But before Emily could reveal the proof, Vanessa struck first. She leaned toward Daniel and whispered lies, framing Emily as the manipulator who had forged her own alibi, who had always been playing a deeper game. For a brief moment, Daniel's face was unreadable, his silence unbearable. Emily thought she had lost everything, and then, in a move that caught even Vanessa off guard, Daniel pulled out his phone and revealed that he had already seen the unedited footage. He had received it hours earlier from a private investigator he had hired the moment the video surfaced. He knew Emily was innocent. What he wanted to see was how Vanessa would react when confronted, and in that moment, her desperation revealed everything. Her lies crumbled, her schemes exposed, and her confidence turned to fury as she realized Daniel had outplayed her. Security escorted her out, her protests echoing down the hall. But the damage she tried to cause left scars that wouldn't fade easily. The climax unfolded that night, when Daniel and Emily finally faced each other without the shadows of lies between them. Emily demanded answers, not about Vanessa, but about the bigger question that had haunted her since the beginning. Was their marriage really an accident? Daniel hesitated, his usual arrogance stripped away, and admitted the truth. He hadn't planned the clerical error that bound them, but once it happened, he chose not to undo it. He had sensed something about Emily from the very beginning. Something real in a world of people who only cared about his wealth. At first, he ignored her because she didn't fit his world, but when fate tied them together, he let it stand, curious to see what she would do. It wasn't love then, not yet, but it wasn't a mistake either. And now, after everything they had endured, Daniel confessed the one thing Emily never expected to hear. He didn't want to let her go. The resolution didn't come with fireworks or a fairy tale kiss, but with quiet honesty. Emily, though overwhelmed by the chaos of their journey, realized she had changed too. She was no longer the invisible woman he once ignored, no longer the outsider mocked by strangers. She had fought lies, endured betrayal, and stood in the spotlight of judgment without breaking. Somewhere along the way, she had found her strength, and in that strength, she found the courage to face Daniel not as a man above her, but as her equal. Their marriage may have started as a mistake in the world's eyes, but standing there together, they both knew it had become something much more powerful, something neither of them could have predicted. But just as the story seemed to find its balance, fate delivered one last twist. Days later, Emily received another letter, written in the same neat handwriting as the first. This time, the words were different, colder, more threatening. Vanessa was never the mastermind, she was just a pawn. The real game has only begun. Emily's hand shook as she read it, realizing that while one enemy had been exposed, another still lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting, and ready to strike. And as she looked at Daniel, who had finally chosen to stand by her side, she knew their story wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a battle far greater than either of them imagined. And that is where the tale of the rich man who ignored her, only to become her husband by mistake, leaves you breathless. Because while the world saw a scandalous marriage and a dramatic betrayal, what truly unfolded was a story about resilience, trust, and the mysterious hand of destiny. The takeaway is simple but unforgettable. Sometimes the mistakes we fear most turn out to be the doors to our greatest transformations. And sometimes the people who once overlooked us become the ones who can no longer imagine a world without us. But as Emily learned, every love story carries shadows, and every ending hides the seed of a new beginning.